Bueno,
Hola.
hola, ¿cómo están? Espero que estén todos bien. Hoy les quiero presentar a Astrid Piber dentro de nuestro ciclo de conferencias. Astrid nació en Austria, estudió en la Universidad de Viena, estudió también con Wolf Prix en la Universidad de Artes Aplicadas de Viena, y después hizo el máster en diseño avanzado en la Universidad de Columbia en el año 98, junto con Axel, y fue también profesora de la Universidad Técnica de Delft. Y desde el año 98, Astrid trabaja en UNStudio. UNStudio es la oficina que fundaron Ben van Berkel y Caroline Voss en el año 98, y que hoy tiene oficinas en distintos lugares del mundo, en Ámsterdam, en Shanghai, en Hong Kong y en Frankfurt, y entre todas estas oficinas hay más de 200 arquitectos trabajando, y quizás lo más importante de la oficina es que fueron en las últimas décadas pioneros en el uso de las tecnologías digitales en el diseño y en la construcción de edificios. Entre las obras más famosas y más reconocidas de la oficina están el Puente Erasmus de Rotterdam, que ya tiene casi 30 años, el Museo Mercedes-Benz en Stuttgart, que se terminó hace unos 15 años, el proyecto de la estación de Arnhem en Holanda y el master plan de toda la zona de la estación, y el proyecto de Rapture City en Hangzhou, en China. Va a hablar en inglés, y lo que vamos a hacer es que yo voy a traducir las cosas más importantes que diga, pero no la voy a interrumpir. Estaba por un blog, dando proyectos, sacando ideas, y cuando cierro una idea yo voy a hacer una síntesis. También está bueno para que todos hagamos el esfuerzo de entender lo que dice, ¿no? En inglés en la medida que podamos. Hi Astrid, thank you for joining us. It's really good to have you with us today, and these are great opportunities for us because it's a chance to bring two worlds together for a couple of hours, no matter how far we are, and so we're really happy that you accepted our invitation and that you're here with us today. And this particular case, it's a wonderful opportunity for us to have a glimpse of the design process of one of the offices that's been pioneering the use of digital design tools and construction tools over the last decades. So, well, welcome to our school, or welcome to our Zoom. I don't know how to say it. And thank you for being with us today.
Buenos días, Argentina. Thanks for bringing me to Argentina. Of course, it's through Zoom, so it's my first Zoom lecture, I have to admit, and I have to get a bit used to that I can't see all of you, but I'm very excited to be able to talk today. And as you mentioned it, yeah, I've been with UNStudio since 1998. I started as a young junior on different projects, and I'm now here more than 20 years. I'm a partner at the firm, and I have seen the firm grow from 45 people to 300. I always had a design focus and a strong interest of what the role of the architect is, how our tools are changing our practice, and what, in the wider sense, the role of architecture can be. And I think the basic question, and what I'd like to talk about, is what drives us as architects and what makes us thrive. And I used a little bit my evolution within UNStudio and the evolution that I have seen of people, of projects, but of the practice as a whole, as the storyline for the lecture today. I share the screen. I hope it works. Let me know if you can see it. Yeah.
Works perfect.
And I think, where are we today? In 2020, actually we are at the threshold between architecture and technology. And that's why we have, in parallel to our, call it mother company, UNStudio, founded 2 years ago, UNSense, which is a company that focuses more on the soft part of our environment, so more on technology and the software that enables us to upgrade our buildings and our environment. And on the other hand, enables UNStudio to integrate that knowledge and that innovation much earlier in the process. So the office locations that we have currently are in Asia, in Shanghai and Hong Kong. I've been involved myself in setting up the Shanghai studio. We have a Frankfurt office because we have a huge project on site, and we are currently investigating, because we have a huge project in Melbourne, to set up an office there, a studio, and also one in Dubai because of a large-scale project we have there. But what connects these offices and what connects all the 300 plus people at the moment, it's really the methodology that in all the studios we work from design till execution, we learn from it and we share that knowledge with each other. And it's the interest in both the process of architecture and in the final result of architecture. And our DNA over the 3 years of practice that we are in now was, of course, coined by the first well-known project like the Erasmus Bridge in Rotterdam that symbolizes how infrastructure can connect the city and how it can express the identity of a place. But I will get back to that later. I think another key part of our DNA is infrastructure, the Arnhem station that I worked on from the master plan, in the master plan stage, but also equally important, the cultural aspect, like the Mercedes-Benz Museum that you mentioned, like this experience of a cultural space. It's not a contradiction to infrastructure. I think we have learned from both of these streams, and that's why, like the project on the right, it's a mixed-use project in China. It's the biggest project we have realized to date. And I would say we have learned to combine the program in such a way that we use what we learned from infrastructure and from the cultural institutions to create an experience and add to the placemaking.
Do you think I can translate?
Yeah, maybe.
Astrid se pregunta qué significa la arquitectura en 2020 y dice que estamos en un umbral entre arquitectura y tecnología. Por esto crearon en paralelo al estudio de arquitectura la empresa UNSense, que se encarga de desarrollar tecnologías y software que después el estudio de arquitectura usa en sus desarrollos. Ella, de todas las oficinas, fue responsable de montar la oficina en Shanghai. Y ahora están pensando, además de las oficinas que mostró y que les conté, en abrir una oficina pequeña en Melbourne y una en Dubái. Lo que conecta a todas estas oficinas es la metodología y el proceso de trabajo y su orientación tanto al proceso como al resultado. Estos proyectos que aparecen y que son los más relevantes de la oficina muestran la importancia de la infraestructura dentro de su manera de entender la arquitectura, en el proyecto de la estación de tren y el puente Erasmus, y de los aspectos culturales. Y ella dice que lo que el último proyecto de China muestra es la posibilidad de juntar estas dos cuestiones, infraestructura y aspectos culturales.
I have chosen for today's lecture the title Architecture and Technology because I think it's not a contradiction, it's rather a holistic approach. And we have always focused on connecting technologies, also emerging technologies with buildings, but ultimately with the end users and what people really need. And I would like to show you today a little bit how we did this in some of our past projects and how it has evolved as a continuous thread throughout the practice. And then I've grouped the presentation in 3 possible answers to the dilemma we are facing now, which has to do with densification of our cities, with the climate, with public health and the awareness of that maybe as architects we can contribute to it. And this will be, one stream is about mobility, the other is about cities, and the third one about circularity. And I think this is important for us, because if we design now for the future, it's not for 5 or 10 years ahead, it's for 30, 40, 50 years ahead. And that's why sort of future-proofing and integrating innovation and these technologies throughout the process is essential. The Turing machine, all of you know, 1936 was a real paradigm shift. But computational innovation in architecture came 50 years later. So it takes a while until innovation finds the ground to be explored. And I would say even 20 more years later, architects started being able to use those tools. Because when I studied in Vienna, and when I came to the office in early 98, we just made the shift from an analog practice with the rod rings and with scratching to a digital studio. And this marked a shift in the technology of design and the making of the design. And it had significant impact on how we would do, how we would go for the design. And when I was a student in Vienna, like this was one of the most read books. It was published in 1994 by Ben van Berkel and Caroline, the founders of UNStudio. And I want to read part of the preface to you. And yeah, be aware, it is 24 years old. In our electronic age, which has replaced mechanistic and technological thinking, the old architectural definitions have lost much relevance. Even the building process themselves are changing, making it necessary to look afresh at the potential meanings of architecture. I was fascinated by this thought that it can change and architecture can upgrade. I listened to a lecture of Ben van Berkel about the Erasmus Bridge, about the Möbius house in Austria, I think back in 96 or 97. And I thought, yeah, this really triggers me, and I'm really interested in learning how that evolves. And the funny thing today, 24 years later, is that there's still truth in this statement, and it will probably even be true in 50 years from now as well. It's how you adapt the parameters and how you adapt the tools on the way and how you react to the problems of the world. That's what makes the difference. ¿Ya?
La conferencia de hoy se llama Arquitectura y Tecnología, encarado pensando que esto puede encararse de una manera holística y que no hay una contradicción en estos dos términos. Y de esta manera ella va a intentar, la charla va a tener 3 partes que van a intentar proponer 3 respuestas diferentes a los dilemas actuales, ¿no? Que tienen que ver con la densificación, con los problemas de salud y con los problemas del medio ambiente. Si la máquina de Turing del año 36 fue el primer elemento, o la aparición de la computación, esto tardó 50 años en que alguien encuentre una manera de que se pudiera usar en arquitectura, y 20 años más para que fuera difundido su uso. Astrid escuchó una conferencia de Ben van Berkel en Viena en la década del 90 en la que Ben estaba presentando este libro y decía esta frase que en la era electrónica o en la era digital las definiciones de la arquitectura y los procesos de la arquitectura cambian y esto obliga a generar nuevos significados. Y nada, esta frase sigue vigente hoy y fue una gran motivación para ella a la hora de encarar su carrera y sigue funcionando de la misma manera.
Integrating technology means also to understand the making of. And the Erasmus Bridge has always been an example of a different way of building a pylon, because it was done offshore and shipped into the harbor. And by that, there was time saving, cost saving, and it made the project possible. 1996. And then there's also the technology that allows upgrading. For example, only a few years ago, 2017, the whole lighting of the Erasmus Bridge was upgraded to LED lighting and integrated with the bridge. And it's a bit about the making, but it's more about the effect of the Erasmus Bridge, because it was a physical connection between the city on the River Maas to the area, the rather poor area in the south of the river, and it really triggered through the connection the economic development. And today there are many famous buildings, and it's a vibrant location, and it really bridges the city. And for us as architects, like, don't laugh, but it's cool to have a sailor that tattoos his project or our project on his back, because it's how he identifies with his hometown and what, yeah, is a symbol and has meaning for people. And I think this, yeah, is sort of an emphasis that whatever we do, it is for people and it needs to be meaningful in one way or the other. And the Erasmus Bridge was also, this was the computer where probably all the AutoCAD 3D forms were drawn. It was one of the first computers from Berkeley and Boss at the time, 94. And it had gigantic impact and allowed, yeah, to work with the shipbuilding method and to analyze the geometry. This was then in AutoCAD. 3 years later, I think we worked on the computer model for Arnhem with all like with the twisted columns, the twisted roof, and yeah, we're switching also that time a little bit later to SGI, to Alias and Maya, and started adopting these technologies during the design process. And to be honest, I think we were so much involved with the technologies of the design, and that were also a little bit the 90s, that yeah, all over the world, architects started experimenting with the tools and starting to learn the tools, that maybe the thinking about the making of it, like how would you then produce it, wasn't that relevant at the moment. That was something that we would figure out later on. And I think that's where this notion in end of the 90s, early 2000s of parametric design developed. And UNStudio always has been quite active in that field, looking at what are the parameters, adapting new softwares and defining new scripts, and really going into, yeah, today we work with BIM 360 and with all those things. And it's sort of, yeah, we have learned in 20 years all this digital fluency. And a few years ago, we have published this book that's called Knowledge Matters, and it describes 11 tools. One of these tools is the parametric, but other tools relate to more the organization or more sustainability and the materials. But they are all there to help to upgrade a performative response of the design that we are doing.
Yeah. I will translate. Usar la tecnología significa entender la forma en que se producen las cosas. El puente de Erasmus, por ejemplo, fue fabricado en un astillero y cambió la manera de construir un puente. En vez de hacerlo en el sitio, después se trasladó al lugar y se montó. Y eso fue en el año 96. Después la tecnología siguió cambiando. Hace poco se agregó la iluminación LED. Y lo más importante del puente es que logró activar un sector enorme de la ciudad que estaba desconectado. Y entonces ahí mostraba la imagen del tatuaje, de qué manera esto tiene un significado para la gente. Y esto muestra también que una obligación de generar edificios que sean significativos y que tengan que tengan un significado para los usuarios. 3 años más tarde, en el proyecto de Arnhem, usaron nuevas tecnologías, ya tecnologías de modelado, y lo que pasaba los primeros años con estas tecnologías es que había una preocupación mucho más grande por la forma que por cómo se construía. Esto finalmente llevó a como esta nueva idea de la arquitectura paramétrica, que tiene que ver tanto con el proceso de construcción como con el de diseño. En este último libro que presenta, ellos hablan del proceso paramétrico, pero también de la sustentabilidad, la organización, la materialidad. Lo paramétrico no es el único tema para llevar adelante un proceso.
In this book, also some of the tools that we have developed on the project of Arnhem are described. And it has been a project that I started working on. It was very active for 20 years in our office and influenced how we are working on many other projects of the type. So I will just quickly show you to give a feeling on what the thoughts behind these tools that we are talking about are. Because the first part of making that master plan was actually infrastructure. It was making the tunnel and designing the tunnel that basically would connect the pedestrians are great, but would also make the underground part of the station area accessible. One of the first parts that was connected to the rail was the ship support, which is a railway viaduct that had to be built first in order to keep the trains running all the time and to change to the high-speed rail. Because the reason this whole master plan was developed was sort of an upgrade on rail technology, like basically a high-speed train that connects the Ruhrgebiet in Germany with the Randstad in the Netherlands. And this was one of the first stations, and it was more than a station, it was really a transfer location. So we have worked also on the platform roofs and the connection across the station. So really linking the northern part of the city of Arnhem with the southern part of the city of Arnhem. We have worked very closely with the different stakeholders. And this is a very old diagram, but it was sort of key on rearranging the space and the ownership of ground and reconnecting different parts of the master plan with each other and establishing this connection. And this is then basically translated in a 24-hour diagram, like which program and which plaza is active at what time, how do we arrange the retail program, where's the housing, where's the office, and how do all parts of the project work together. And what organized, for example, that we were stacking different programs, like the car parking on the bottom, the bus deck in the middle, and the offices on top, were these, what we called V-walls, that really combined the different optimized grids, but also created daylight, created ventilation, escape routes in the different parking spots. And actually, as a junior, this was the model I was building, literally. It's a cardboard model, one of the first models that we worked on. And it was very exciting to see this come alive. And in reality, it was also a little bit like that, because the car park was completed, afterwards the bus deck, and it came all together in pieces. And here you see the car park that is column free, because we are using these V-walls. You see how that spatially works and how it connects to the bus level. And at all times, all these things were under operation. And for example, even when we look at the platform roofs, they came quite at the end, but they were really connecting to wayfinding. They were connecting to furniture elements that we designed as well to create a more pleasant passenger experience. And the whole project was completed with the last part of the station hall only 2017. So it was a process that lasted 20 years, but brought lots of knowledge to our office, lots of knowledge in regards to mixed use, analyzing user flows, but also of adapting during the process of design and construction, the strategies, and still keeping true to the example. And I wanted to show it as a short intro because it best reflects how we think about inner city densification, how we think of integrating technology with architecture, because yeah, also how the roof is made, how the columns are made. This is all innovative technology integrated with a straightforward plan. And I think I will talk later on a little bit more about the manufacturing of it, because that's another aspect where technology plays a very important role. And I think why it's key is because while we were working on this, it propelled other ideas for other projects. And I think that's what you often don't see if you only look at the final result of a project.
El proyecto de Arnhem es un proyecto que estuvo 20 años en la oficina. Empezó por el diseño de un túnel para conectar las dos partes de la ciudad, un túnel para peatones y para autos, pero antes de hacer todo esto había que hacer un nuevo viaducto para las vías del tren, que en realidad era el motivo de este desarrollo. La construcción del upgrade del sistema ferroviario a trenes de gran velocidad para unir las regiones de Ruhrgebiet en Alemania y Randstad en Holanda. Esto empezó por un diagrama, que primero era un diagrama de conexiones y después de usos a lo largo de 24 horas, y termina en este corte en el que se ve cómo se van superponiendo los distintos usos. Hay unos patios que van cambiando de forma y resolviendo la diferencia de modulaciones que necesita cada uno de los usos, y metiendo luces, estos patios con las paredes laterales, para las distintas funciones. Cuando ella empezó en la oficina, trabajó en esta maqueta literalmente, en uno de sus primeros trabajos en la oficina, y otra de las dificultades del proyecto es que se tuvo que construir con la estación y todo funcionando. Se terminó el proyecto de las oficinas en 2017, y lo más importante es de qué manera este proyecto generó un montón de conocimiento para la oficina y un montón de ideas que después se fueron materializando en otros proyectos. Esta lo muestra como introducción porque permite entender la preocupación por la integración entre tecnología y arquitectura, y por la preocupación por la densificación del área central de las ciudades.
And what is also quite interesting is we designed this project when the world was still mostly analog, and we were just experimenting with the computer, and it was delivered in a time that is already super digital, and it still had to prove that it's future-proof now. And that brings me to the topic of future-proofing cities. If we talk about that today, and if we think about that today, then we also realize that we are facing quite some serious new challenges. And those are, connected to climate change, but they are also connected to technology and transport, movement of goods and people, but they are also connected to how we produce energy, how we use it, where do we produce food. And lately we also have, of course, found out that through social distancing, I think public health is something that comes more and more on the agenda of our cities. And the question is, for example, if we design for cities, like, of course, each city has their own challenges and their own politics, their own rules. But if you start designing cities with a human-centric approach, that's maybe the only way to address future needs, and maybe not design it throughout, but create that flexibility and that adaptability of a city. Why do we talk about this densification? Because it's really an important topic. And before we had the pandemic, like, the forecasts were really significant that 2050, 65% of the total global population would be living in cities. There would be a large growth of Asian cities and move to bigger cities. And that's logic, because it was always, it's good quality, better jobs, and basically also good because with a lower footprint, it could be more economic. The question is if we will face also the outwards movement again because of the segregation and the distancing, and people enjoying landscape and nature much more. And there's a sort of contradiction. There will be more people, we will produce more CO2, we will consume more energy and more emissions, but we will also have to deal with the fact, how are we creating a healthy environment, not on the global scale, but actually in a finer grain. I think there are discussions about the 20-minute city, there are discussions like how can we design on a human scale the urban habitat in a way that it offers all these, and how do we combine the global benefits with the local benefits. And especially because it's Asian cities where this boom is forecasted, I think it's very important to counteract the pollution, because also construction is one of the major drivers of our economy, but also of our pollution. And cities like Seoul, for example, they are having strategies on green belt policies and how to counteract that. But I think also with the current pandemic and the impact and the relationship of humans with nature, we will have to think how can we integrate technology in such a way that we overcome some of those problems. And the challenge for us as architects, like we have limited tools and we can't change policies, we can't change governments, of course, but we can contribute when we get a task. So I was looking at the projects that we currently have in our portfolio, but also that we are starting to do. And one common thread is really that most of the projects are connected to densifying cities. They are located mostly really close to transport hubs, to metro stations. They often are a good balanced mixed use. We are asked to define that, and they all have to use space efficiently, integrate nature. And I think today I want to show how we can use architecture tools to optimize that on 3 levels. And the first one will be about the multimodal transport hubs. Then the second one is more about cities and mixed-use projects in general. And the third stream is more about trying to design a circular economy or for a circular economy. And these are not full answers, but those are directions that I think have to evolve and each use their own tools in the future.
El proyecto de la estación de Arnhem empezó en un mundo analógico y se terminó en un mundo digital. Y esto trae el tema de cómo hacer proyectos que sean a prueba de futuro, future proof. Y lo mismo en relación a las ciudades, cómo pensar ciudades que resistan el paso del tiempo y los cambios. Entonces, esto tiene que pasar a través de un diseño de ciudades centradas en el hombre, y una de las cuestiones por las que es más importante es por la densificación que va creciendo. Si se pensaba que en el año 2050 el 65% de la población mundial iba a vivir en ciudades, sobre todo este número llevado por el crecimiento de las ciudades en Asia, ahora la pregunta es si esto va a pasar o si va a haber un movimiento contrario de gente alejándose de las ciudades e intentando vivir cada vez más lejos. Y la manera de que las ciudades puedan sobrevivir y seguir creciendo en momentos como el presente, con temas de salud pública, tiene que ver con el diseño no solo de la ciudad en general, sino del grano fino de la ciudad, pensar en sectores más chicos, esta idea de la ciudad de 20 minutos, y las oportunidades que tienen los arquitectos a veces no tienen que ver con las grandes políticas, sino que hacer con los encargos. Y los encargos que ellos tienen ahora tienen que ver casi todos con densificar la ciudad, con proyectos grandes cerca de nodos de transporte, y con integrar la naturaleza y con usar eficientemente el espacio. Entonces vamos a ver 3 tipos de proyectos, algunos van a ser hubs de transportes, usos mixtos y la posibilidad de diseñar una economía circular.
The first possible answer to overcome this densification or streamline the densification is designing for multimodal experiences or transport hubs. And Arnhem has been a key example for us, because I think the whole study of user flows, it was really about creating a seamless landscape where you could walk and access the activity. So it was really about the finer grain, like going from one key moment in the journey to the next one. And if you look then at a much bigger project, it was the whole Qatar Railway project in Doha, where we designed all the stations for the 5 new metro lines. It was on a much bigger scale, but we also broke it down to the finer grain and created a systemic approach to a new metro network, and how that could basically upgrade and connect this city in a new way. And a very interesting study that's currently ongoing, that's for Hyperloop, creating a hub at Schiphol, and basically, looking at the different modes of transport that come together there, and how those could balance and optimize the movements. And looking also what could be the additional program, how the city of Schiphol could develop the airport city, and how the future could look like. If I just quickly go through the Qatar Rail project, I think it has been about identity, and it has been about the identity of the network as a whole, and the identity of each of the metro lines, but also the identity of each of the stations. So it's not a system that's repetitive, but it's a custom designed for every station. There's a unique solution, but there's a formal language, and we like to call it brand guidelines, that really connect the reading of these stations with each other, which comes from these vaulted roofs. And there are stations that are below ground, there are above ground stations, and there are, of course, the intersecting stations that have been a bit more complex. But we broke it down basically to the smaller elements, like the vaulted ceilings, but also the panelization of the walls, the escalator, smaller ingredients that we would group depending on the scale and the identity, and create individual stations. It's like it's a family of stations in a way. So with children that follow the same genes, but are slightly different, and adjusted to the needs at each station, which was important because those metro lines have been built by different contractors, and it was also equally important to develop a material library and the product library that can be accessible from all these contracting parties. So these were the mock-ups that were done in Doha prior to starting building, to really compare the quality of the different lighting fixtures, of the tiles, and create a standard that's basically carried throughout the whole project. And this is then one of the above ground stations realized, and the inside also completed last year. And I think 43 stations are now complete, and the rest is going to happen. And the important thing there is also, like, some of the stations are really in Doha, in the inner city, connecting to the education city, to the cultural venues, but some other stations are connected to new master plans and to new expansions of the city. So they're setting the infrastructure and the technology for the further development of the city.
El diseño de estos hubs de circulación tiene que ver más con el diseño del grano fino y del detalle y de los sectores pequeños. Ellos tienen 3 proyectos. El primero fue el de la estación de tren de Arnhem, el segundo es el sistema de trenes de Qatar, y el tercero es el proyecto del Hyperloop de Schiphol, el aeropuerto de Ámsterdam, que significa conectar todos los distintos sistemas de transporte que confluyen en ese lugar. En el caso de Qatar, lo más importante era generar una identidad, generar la identidad del sistema generar una identidad para cada una de las líneas de tren y generar una identidad para cada una de las estaciones. Entonces, para lograr esto, las estaciones son todas diferentes, pero tienen un lenguaje común. El lenguaje común son estas bóvedas y el diseño de estas bóvedas. Y finalmente, el sistema funciona como una familia de estaciones que comparten de la misma forma que una familia comparte los mismos genes, van compartiendo las mismas partes, pero armadas de distinta manera. Entonces, para que esto funcione, trabajo con una biblioteca de materiales, una biblioteca de productos, y estas estaciones, algunas están en el centro de la ciudad y algunas están más alejadas, y son los lugares donde se están haciendo nuevos master planes y donde va a ir creciendo la ciudad gracias a esta red que va a posibilitar el crecimiento.
And one of the airport cities that we worked on was the Taiwan airport in Taiwan, the new Terminal 3, where we worked from the master planning to the design stage. It was a competition, it was quite a heavy tender, and it really integrated like, the existing terminals 1 and 2, but also the idea was to create a real new experience that becomes a new hub and also an experience of Taiwan, like represents the identity of Taiwan and brings this locality back into the project. And I think when we started, our idea was to how can we create a flexible space, like these mega hubs tend to be really huge open spaces, very repetitive, very much the same. But how could we create microclimates within that airport and create a new typology of where we can talk about a more passenger-centric experience? And I think we tried that by combining different natural elements and different elements that we know from the architecture and from the crafts in Taiwan, and combined that with the logistics and, for example, wayfinding through daylight in the ceilings, but also a visual clarity in what you see outside, so that you basically can experience the departure, like the departure. Like when you go for departure, you also see how people arrive with the taxi and start their journey. So you know where in the process you are as a passenger. And also when you arrive, you have some daylight and some clear direction how to enter the airport city. And I think this idea of the macroclimates and this idea of how, like a chain of airports, how you connect Terminal 1, 2, and 3 with each other and create like a green spine on the land side with pockets, with gardens, and with program that supports the airport, has become this idea of an extended experience of an airport city that like continues between land side and air side and has thresholds in the journey of the customer. So this idea of the macroclimates, because it's something we find missing in some of the airports we are traveling through, was what we developed further. Like how could you get really the climatic conditions of Taiwan to the inside and create sort of temperature differences, create humidity difference, depending on the time of the year, but also if it's a place to wait or if it's a place to proceed to the gate, and create in such a huge, vast airport, because it's above 300,000 square meters in program, like differences in the zones. And we were not able to do this in Taiwan, unfortunately, but we were asked in Incheon Airport in Seoul to look at the cultural center, at the satellite terminal, and how that could really link and create a identity, a cultural identity of Korea in the airport. And one thing, the first small project that was realized is a little meeting point. It's this pavilions, this coffee place, and it's called Landmark Area. And it's in the new terminal, in Terminal 2 in Incheon, which is it's one of these big wide and open terminals, but it really was anchoring people to a place and linking it with the experience of real nature with wood and creating a real anchor point in the development. And I think that is that allowed us to look in a much smaller, like in a product interior scale, at what the passengers need and how we can influence the journey. And that's also a little bit reflecting how we saw this idea on the macroclimates and microclimates, that it's not all the same, but it's really contributing to the relaxation, the recovery, the clear wayfinding, and to the wellness of people in the transit mode.
El aeropuerto de Taiwán fue un concurso muy difícil, y lo que ellos se propusieron en el proyecto fue generar una nueva experiencia en el uso de aeropuertos y una nueva experiencia de Taiwán. Y la idea más importante fue generar microclimas. En general, los aeropuertos son un gran espacio único, bajo una cubierta, y la intención del proyecto era generar diferencias dentro de este lugar, combinando naturaleza con artesanía del lugar, pensando que la luz puede ser lo que guíe el recorrido, la luz en el cielo raso, el recorrido de los pasajeros, y que está bueno que el aeropuerto... que los pasajeros estén orientados en el aeropuerto, entendiendo en qué parte del proceso están llegando, yendo hacia el avión, y los distintos movimientos se puedan ver. Una de las ideas principales fue tener una gran columna vertebral verde en el centro del proyecto, que participaba tanto de la zona de tierra como de la zona de aire. Y para lograr estos microclimas, además del diseño, se pensó en tener distintas temperaturas y distintas situaciones de humedad en estas zonas diferentes. Finalmente, este proyecto no lo construyeron, pero fueron contratados por el aeropuerto de Seúl, Incheon, para hacer un centro cultural que refleje los valores de Corea a la gente que viajaba, y la primera etapa que se construyó fueron estos cafés, donde esta idea de los microclimas, de la naturaleza y de las artesanías definen estos espacios.
A possible answer to the densification on the level of cities is that what we realize with the projects that we are dealing with, that we are more and more designing cities within cities. It started with Arnhem in a way, but we see it with many more projects, like the Raffles City projects that I'm going to show you in more detail as well, but also the 4, which is in the inner city of Frankfurt and comprising 4 towers and the very dense podium, but also the South Bank project in Melbourne, that all have in common that it's very high density. It's not one singular building, and it's really how those projects connect with the context and the urban fabric that make or define the parameters of success for these projects. And just to give you a glimpse on the one in Melbourne, that is really set on the South Bank. It is like we would have been allowed to do 1 bigger tower, but we decided for 2 towers, because in that way we could create better places inside the floor plates, so better units, but also create a better integration with the surrounding and the scale of the surrounding in terms of program, but also in terms of routing and visual connectivity. So the driving design element of that project has been what we call the green spine. So it's this idea of creating basically a connectivity with the ground floor green, with the public green, letting it step up to the public terraces, but also connecting it into the facades of the units, creating balconies, and also like twisting the views of these units and creating high quality on the upper levels and impacting the skyline in a very elegant way. So how we looked at that was really the detailed programming, like what could be the allocation of more public and shared programs, like connected to lifestyle, connected to a sort of marketplace, but also always connecting exterior with interior. So this transition between what is a balcony, what is a terrace, and how does it relate to the indoor programming was very important to create this vertical urban landscape. And we created this terrace podium stepping up, creating an experience throughout. And by that, we're also able to use these as sustainable features in the project, like to include upgrade the program by having better offer to the users, but also by upgrading the building for the future use. And we called it elevated urban grounds, because that's also something that we see with this densification happening more and more, is that these podiums are getting several public levels. So there's not one ground floor street level, but we are seeing that the public comes into several levels and needs to be offered both areas to breathe and public areas, but then also segregated areas. And that is, for example, one of the tools that thinking about like the segregation strategies that we are facing right now can be very helpful, because you could control the amount of people, but you could have more public space for people in cities available.
Todos estos proyectos de densificación tienen que ver con la idea de pensar ciudades dentro de las ciudades. Estos proyectos que mostró en distintos lugares se caracterizan por su alta densidad, por tener varios edificios, no ser solamente un edificio aislado, y lo más importante, por la conexión entre el proyecto nuevo y el contexto, que es lo que determina el éxito o no de esta operación, de qué manera se integra con el contexto. En el caso de Melbourne, por ejemplo, el proyecto son 2 torres. Si bien podrían haber hecho una sola torre más grande, hacer 2 torres les permitía esta idea de pensar en las conexiones y los espacios públicos. Las 2 torres tienen como una columna vertebral verde, vertical, y esto va rotando y permite tener vistas en distintas orientaciones y sobre todo trabajar con la relación entre interiores y exteriores. Esto genera un paisaje vertical, y este paisaje vertical entra en relación también con el basamento, que lo que permite es tener varios niveles públicos, no solamente un nivel de vereda, sino, como se ve en esta imagen, tener varios niveles que interactúan entre sí.
If we look at the COVID issues, I think it's places for people that we need to create, and architecture is sort of what can navigate people, and it creates experiences like in Arnhem. But it's very important, or we think it's successful when you can combine that with the right analytic studies. And when I think how I was counting people in Arnhem transferring from one location to the other, like we now have the technology in place to automatically measure that and use that to upgrade our environments in a constant basis. So I think that's one of the future potentials that we see when working with such an approach to public spaces, to mixed areas, but also mobility hubs, of course. And the key learning from Arnhem is also that we were able to connect parts of the city that weren't working that well. And the impact of that project was also that the surrounding areas, they were better connected, they got a real upgrade. And I think that's what densification in inner cities is also about. It's not about singular buildings. It's really about creating impact on the surrounding and creating densification of use in a way. And I think from what we did in China with the Raffles City Hangzhou project, this was sort of the brief, because the project is set in a new town of Hangzhou, And when we went for the first site visit, there were still all buildings surrounding it under construction. And the task was sort of creating, they called it a 24/7 destination that anchors the user experience. And of course, it had to be commercially viable and so on. But I think the idea was that it becomes a city where you find everything within the block of 100 to 150 meters that you could need, but it also attracts people from outside. And coming back to our methodology, we started with these doodles of like, how could users potentially go into the 2 towers? Like we were also exploring, should it be 3 towers or 4 towers, or how tall should the buildings be, and how should it be positioned? But it's these simple studies that brought us to a very simple organization in the end, where we said the best optimized place to put the 2 towers would be on the diagonal opposite corners because of the sun shading, because the plot was so small that we were saying, yeah, we have to put them in a way that you still can grow plants on ground floor, that you can plant trees, and that there is sun on there. And that's why the podium has 4 huge courtyards that really create this connection between the podium and the towers. And we linked on the basement to the metro, and the commercial functions, they are basically put on the other diagonal, like the retail center. And this simple organization was basically coming up from the fact that if you look at the Qiantang River and at the lake from 250 meters, you have the best view in the upper 100 meters of the tower. And to optimize this, it was also the reason why the towers are twisted, because the apartments on the top floors, they are organized to face south, like in China, traditionally bedrooms, but also living rooms should all face southwards. And if there is the river in the south, that's even much better. And the bottom section of the towers would house office and huge floor plates of 2,100 square meters. And there would be a hotel and the service department section in between these towers. So the form that these towers got was, I think we printed 100 of these models. These are just a few to see how would it be optimized. But what was driving it was also the commercial plan, like to really have the residents on top and only 3 apartments, so 1,000 square meters of floor plate, and how that would link to the floors of the offices below. And the diagonal shopping mall was for us also really key, that this idea of like not having a podium and 2 towers, but having a podium that's so transparent that you can see the towers and that you also can get daylight into the shopping mall was key. So we designed this central void space that would sort of spiral upwards, open up the views towards the towers, but also through opening up got in more daylight to the different levels of the mall. And this continuity was very important, also driven by a commercial idea, and that was the idea of what you see, it guides you, it makes it more attractive, and it's not just, I think what I want to say is it's not just an aesthetic movement, but it's really an optimization of how your journey as a customer in that mall would look like. And it's really daylight that guides people. There are 2 long wings of the mall that end in a sort of, we call it diagonal void, that also brings daylight in. And each floor has a routing that's following a 8, so that there's never a dead end. There's always continuity. And the idea is also, and I think that has worked out very good in that mall, is that it's a combination of retail, but also F&B. So it has zones to meet and greet for business, and it has zones that follow more the traditional concept. Should I stop a bit?
Yeah, I will translate. En este proyecto, en Hangzhou, bueno, primero dijo que en la estación de Arnhem, cuando empezaron, contaban la gente manualmente. Esto no se hace más. Y entonces los datos ahora permiten pensar los proyectos de otra manera. Y una de las cosas más importantes es el impacto que tiene el proyecto, estos proyectos grandes y de densificación, en todas las áreas vecinas. Al conectar áreas que antes estaban desconectadas, estas áreas en general mejoran. Entonces, parte de la riqueza del proyecto tiene que ver no con el terreno mismo, sino con lo que producen o lo que pueden producir alrededor. En este proyecto, en Hangzhou, en China, la idea era generar un destino que estuviera, un edificio que funcionara las 24 horas todos los días de la semana, y en una manzana, en una zona nueva de la ciudad, una manzana grande de 150 por 150, ubican estas dos torres, empezando el proyecto a partir de pensar en los accesos y en las conexiones entre las distintas funciones, y descubren que los mejores lugares son las diagonales para ubicar las torres. Y de esto permite tener luz, que el sol llegue al centro de la manzana, y permite pensar un basamento que toma la diagonal opuesta y que tiene 4 patios para aprovechar esta llegada de la luz. En la otra diagonal, además del shopping, se encuentran las conexiones con el metro, y la forma de las torres tiene que ver con las orientaciones. Los pisos de arriba tienen departamentos, y en China los departamentos se busca que tanto los livings como los dormitorios orienten al sur, sería nuestro norte, y en este caso además hacia el sur estaba el río. Entonces esto determinó la forma de cómo son los pisos de arriba de las torres. Las plantas de abajo tienen oficinas con plantas lo más grandes posibles, y en el medio hay un hotel en una torre y un apart-hotel o service apartments en la otra. Hicieron más de 100 maquetas de la forma hasta llegar a la forma final, y el basamento que forma el shopping busca ser lo más transparente posible en sus cubiertas para que llegue la luz del sol y para que además se vean las torres desde abajo, y funciona esta idea de la continuidad entre los programas del basamento y los programas que están en altura. La circulación del shopping es como en forma de 8 para que no haya callejones sin salida, y combina funciones de negocio, lugares para trabajar, con lugares comerciales.
Yes, it's a continuous experience, but it has been the first mall with that was naturally ventilated in China, and we got the LEED gold certificate for it. But it was really the making of it, and the producing also, for example, for the facades, everything digitally, and creating the whole envelope and the whole fins of the different facade types directly from the computer models. We had to move and start our office in Shanghai in 2009. The project started in 2008, and we worked, this we did for the tender phase, basically, of the facades, to see can we optimize it, because there were different floor heights of office, hotel, and residential. As you can imagine, there is a different grid in the facade, and there are different needs on sun shading. So we optimized basically the glass elements. They are not curved, they are straight elements, of course, but it's the array that creates the twist. And it's also the fins were completely optimized to create the best sun shading and keep out the heat from the towers and reduce the heat gain. So we were looking at what's the repetition of those elements, and how could they be optimized material-wise, and how can they basically emphasize the form of the tower. And this is, I think, what for us is mastering the crafts. Like, we were lucky that we were working with a client that really wanted our supervision on the side, that we worked with the LDI from the beginning to the end in collaboration, and that we were really able to bring the concept to reality, and it was opened in 2017. And yeah, here you see that's one of the drone pictures that we have, but it's now housing the 5-star hotel, the offices, and the different functions. But this idea of having these courtyards, that you see where do the office tower starts and how does it land in the podium, has been key also for orientating the user in the project. But equally important has been this analytic approach to how do we make it feasibly, repetitive, and still stunning. And I think especially the entrance and the link to the first floor, but also to the basement level, as sort of 3 more public levels of the building, like integrating these staircases with seating and with informal meeting spaces, like creating a sort of, although you occupy the whole plot, but creating these public spaces that bring people into the building, but they also frame the new city of Hangzhou in a very spectacular way, and it makes it an anchor point in that new area, and includes this, we call it framing of the new town, but it's also relating it to the human scale again. It creates smaller sequences of spaces that one can relate to, and go from one to the other and experience a chain of different events.
El shopping tiene ventilación natural, además de iluminación cenital, y es el primer shopping en China con ventilación natural, tuvo certificado LEED Gold, y esta es una obra que empezó en el año 2009, ellos abrieron su oficina en Shanghai para hacer la obra, y se terminó en el año 2017. La fachada también tiene el problema de integrar todos estos usos, la oficina, el hotel y las viviendas, que requieren distintas modulaciones de fachada, y lo que une todos estos tipos son estos parasoles que van rotando y van evitando que el sol le pegue a la fachada. Los patios sirven para que la gente pueda estar orientada dentro del conjunto, pero también en un proyecto que ocupa todo el terreno, sirven como contrapartida para liberar espacios públicos y darle espacios al resto de la ciudad. Sirven también estas operaciones de los patios y la combinación con los edificios para enmarcar todo el proyecto de la ciudad nueva de Hangzhou, y en definitiva lo que producen es una secuencia de pequeños lugares dentro de un proyecto enorme. Uno lo va experimentando a través de estos pequeños espacios.
Yeah, that brings me to the third possible answer to densification, and it's maybe the most theoretical one, because it's quite new for all of us, and it's this thought about like that you design for a circular economy, and to look at the cradle approach that was coined already quite some time ago, but I think similar as with the innovations in digital computing, I think we have to learn the tools. And I think one of the tools is to see our built environment with those different layers, like with the different layers, and there are different lifespan that is connected to the layers. And in a sense, you can say that what we do in terms of cradle to cradle can have different implications on the urban scale. Like we are working with a neighborhood, with a city in the south of the Netherlands, on ideas on how to create this circular city, but it's also circularity in terms of creating, for example, this office tower in Amsterdam that can be converted to different use. It's designed to now as office, but it's also designed to be converted to residential. The retrofit and the modularity of construction is an important part of the cradle to cradle philosophy as well. And likewise, we engage also in the real material research, that we look at bio-based materials and how to define new building elements from it. And those are European research projects that we do. But I think for us in the studio, it's very important because they influence how we think about our projects. And that is basically also the essence of what circularity connects. It's holistic, it's connects ethical and strategical thinking, and that in systems. So the transcalar approach of UNStudio to work with small research projects from product design upwards to the large mixed-use projects is really learning in the small prototypes and connecting it to bigger thoughts in architecture. And just to go a little bit into the theory, I borrowed this, of course, from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. And it's this, what is sustainability? Yeah, sustainability means you have a linear process, you make something, you use it, and then you take something, you make something, and you dump it afterwards when you don't need it anymore. Sustainability is basically, you do the same thing, but you try to use water, less water and less energy, and that you have less CO2 emissions. So you make actually this linear process a little bit better. But the idea of circularity is basically to change the process from a linear process to a circular process, where it's not about like to take, make, and dump, but that the materials stay in that loop, and they are defined through these different levels. And I think what we find interesting on this thought is that it basically impacts our thinking in all the different processes of architecture. Because of course, like when you design, it means you have to think about the material life cycle of a project. So which components can be reused, which are easily produced, which are maybe renewable materials that can be used. So it's this thought of you could eventually disassemble a project and reuse the elements and not waste things. And there's another aspect that, because we come from the process part of things, is also that it impacts the socio-economic life cycle of a project. So it means you work on projects in a different way, like with different partners and different contracts. Like one simple example is, you don't buy a lighting fixture and it's yours, but you lease it from a supplier that it still owns it, but upgrades it. And these are ideas explored for more than just lighting fixtures, for elevators. We all know that, but it's a different way of thinking, and also requires a different way of thinking in the design. So for us, I think we don't want to make bad things just a little bit less bad, but we want to really improve them through how we design it. And I think there we are still in the footsteps, and we don't have the answers yet. But what I see is that we have developed with parametric design, with the digital tools, we have the right tools in place to really develop this idea further, and that we can develop sort of new data of our buildings that helps us to follow the life cycle of these buildings. I'm not sure if I'm very clear on this, but it's sort of like when you know that this process is happening on different scale levels, you can also suggest the resources in the right way, and it triggers new businesses to come up, and also triggers probably new experiences of spaces.
La tercera respuesta esta cuestión de la densificación es la más teórica y es intentar diseñar para una economía circular. Esto implica aprender nuevas herramientas de diseño y pensar en capas, y pensar en los ciclos de vida de los distintos componentes del edificio. Edificios que pueden diseñarse como edificios de oficina, pero estar pensados para adaptarse como edificios residenciales, por ejemplo. Y esta aproximación a un diseño circular tiene un componente holístico, un componente ético, un componente estratégico, y obliga a pensar en términos de sistemas y no de objetos cerrados. Porque, ¿qué significa sustentabilidad? Si el esquema lineal, el esquema tradicional es lineal de utilización de un producto o de un edificio, que significa tomar recursos, hacer algo con ellos, usar el producto y después tirarlo, ese es el sistema lineal. Lo sustentable sería, cuando uno hace algo, tratar de usar la menor cantidad de agua y de energía posible. Cuando uno usa el edificio, que esto tenga la menor huella de carbono posible, y definitivamente no tirarlo después, sino pensar que el edificio o sus componentes tienen que reusarse. Entonces, en definitiva, es transformar un esquema lineal en un esquema circular. Y esta idea de esquema circular tiene un impacto grande en la arquitectura, un impacto en los procesos de diseño, y tiene el potencial también, además de cambiar la forma en que diseñamos, de que a partir de esto surjan nuevos espacios.
A quick example, because it's easier to study this on smaller elements, is, for example, a hotel room that we designed with this method. So thinking of all the elements in the hotel room and how long they would last, and when would they need to be renovated and disassembled, or how could you, like, from bigger elements that will be upgraded, create smaller elements and use them for something else. And I think we are only in the explorative phase of that, but we see that basically these new tools that we have also create like new requirements, for example, for BIM, to really have the definition of all the materials and like create this fluent combination from design to production, and what we learn from the materials and the disassembly, for example, to really influence also how we think in the design phase about it. And like the easy way to think of circularity is by not tearing down every building. And I think in many inner cities, this is a project in Seoul, where the original building, the headquarters of that company, was built in the 1970s, early 1980s, and the structure of the building is still fully intact, and there is no need to tear the structure down of the building. But the facade that you see here on the left, how it has been before the renovation, was basically not adequate anymore in terms of heat transmission, in terms of getting the sunlight in, and not creating a very good working environment. And we worked on this project between 2013 and 2019, and the retrofit was basically the facade, but also the full equipment, the mechanical system, and the interior spaces, because the aim was of that company Hanwha to stay in their headquarters, but upgrade the workplaces of their employees. Because here you see, for example, the latest Samsung phone and the latest Tesla that came out in 2013, and how the office spaces looked in 2013. And Hanwha is a company that's a world leader on solar technologies. And I think they were really in need of changing something to their work environment, also to attract talent. And our suggestion was to create a sort of responsive facade that would regulate and react to the indoor environment together with the mechanical equipment, but that also could maybe generate energy. So very pragmatic, we looked at the structural grids of the facade and how that could be changed from this horizontal striping facade to something that's maybe more responsive what's happening on the inside and in a modular way. So we looked at these elements that could go across 1 or 2 floors and would integrate solar panels, like either smaller or bigger modules, also depending on the location in the building. So we were looking at the whole building skin, north facade, south facade, east and west, their exposure to sunlight, and also to the neighboring buildings, and where would be the optimum locations for placing PV cells, and combining this with this modular systemic approach of the different modules and the different sizes. Also the depth of modules between the north and the south facade would be different, and the height would be different in accordance to the program behind and the views as well. So it would create this field-like facade. And the interesting element as well on the construction was that Anwar didn't necessarily want to move out of the building, move somewhere else and wait for the renovation, but the whole building was renovated while it was in use. And before the renovation, there were roughly 3,000 people working in the tower, but then they would always renovate 3 floors at a time from bottom up. And this would unfortunately take 42 months. The building was under construction, but you would see it also coming like from bottom up. And the parametric design, the technology of designing these different modules and like grouping them into families was also what allowed us to help on the logistic process of producing the right elements at the right time and putting them at the right place. So this was in one of their factories, and this was basically the system, how it was brought to the site, because they were always storing on one of the 3 floors the elements and bringing them into position and moving the whole thing upwards. So I think that was quite an assembly of these elements, and these show north facade, south facades with the different depths. And I think for us, the philosophy of using one system with variation within that system to accommodate basically the climate response and accommodate also that you can include PV cells into the facade has been key. And it has become a real upgrade. It's looks like a new building, and that's one of the potentials that maybe are important for densification in cities, because you're marginally creating more square meters, but you're creating better space. And also on top of that, it creates for the company in that case also a new identity. And it allowed also to connect the public square and connect this plaza and create a better environment, not just indoor, but also in how the building is connected to the surrounding buildings.
La respuesta más fácil a esta pregunta de la economía circular es cómo diseñar edificios sin demoler lo que existe. En el caso de este proyecto, que es la sede de una compañía que fue diseñado a fines de los 70 y principios de los 80, la estructura estaba perfecta, pero la fachada ya estaba obsoleta por la transmisión de calor y por el tipo de vidrio. Entonces, el proyecto fue diseñar una nueva fachada y cambiar todas las instalaciones del proyecto. La fachada es una fachada que responde a las condiciones de iluminación interior, y sobre todo la particularidad más grande es que genera energía. Tiene incorporados paneles solares para generar energía, y está de manera modular. Algunos módulos tienen un piso de alto, otros 2, y integran los paneles y se ubican en los lugares en los que el edificio recibe más sol, de acuerdo a la orientación y a la sombra que le producen los vecinos. Una de las dificultades de la obra es que la empresa no se mudó mientras se construyó esto y se cambiaron la fachada y las instalaciones, había más de 3.000 personas trabajando, y eso hace que la obra se tuvo que hacer de a 3 pisos por vez, y todo el proceso llevó 42 meses.
And I'm sorry, I was a bit over enthusiastic putting the slides together, but this is the last project, I promise.
Oh no, go ahead.
And it's a smaller scale. It's in Amsterdam, and it's also in quite a well-known street for retail, where all the fancy shops are. And we were asked to basically renovate or retrofit this existing building, and it's so that there are quite some strict rules and on how you have to treat those facades and these buildings, and how you have to segregate like the plinth, the midsection and the roof, and follow the traditional rules. And I think I wanted to show it because it's a different level of craftsmanship. Like the project before, it was all about digital craftsmanship, creating the field, creating the modules, and something repetitive. And this is more about the craftsmanship that is more linked to the materials. And our idea was to create like these extended show windows that follow the same fluidity as textiles in fashion, because this area is really where all the fashion brands are, but it's close to the museum district. So it has a notion of like exposing the products, but it's also creating the right cultural framing for those. And it's twisted glass pieces that are held by a steel frame that was produced in those elements and then assembled in the factory and brought to site and lifted in there in this, like these frames were just there to hold it up during during basically the assembly, but then also bringing it to the site and lifting it into the place, and creating this contrast also between the brick, the glass, and the steel framing. And I think if we talk about integrating technology or using technology and architecture, then it's also about where in the world are we working on such a project, because it's very much connected to the place, to the craftsmanship, and to the companies you work with, and how you can implement that. And I think that's why I've been showing China, Qatar, Seoul, Amsterdam in a continuation, and that you can see the topic of craftsmanship slightly altered depending on the location and on the possible materials, but it's something that fascinates us. And if I'm looking back to why I started as young architect at UNStudio, and this was much connected to the theories that I learned in the early 90s, and to the quotes that I mentioned in the beginning, for example, it is the same search for these, how can we contribute to architecture in a new way again and again and again. And I think that makes working in different cultural contexts and working with all the different companies involved in making this possible such an exciting journey. And yeah, it is very exciting to work at UNStudio if you are ever interested. I think it has been a very good journey for myself, and it's where I see really the evolution of thinking, and this combination of architecture and technology in everyday life and in our projects. And that's something that's for architects very, very rewarding.
Este proyecto en Ámsterdam es la renovación de un local, en la calle principal comercial de negocios de moda, y tiene reglas muy estrictas la ciudad que separan el basamento de los edificios, los pisos de desarrollo y el remate. Entonces la idea era combinar un poco estos lugares y trabajar a partir de la materialidad y de la habilidad de fabricación. Intentar conseguir como una fluidez textil de las formas que tenga que ver con la función de esta calle, y para eso trabajaron con estos marcos de acero inoxidable y con vidrios curvos. Todo esto se montó en talleres y después se fabricó en talleres y se trajo y se montó directamente en el lugar. Y esta aproximación a través de los materiales y de las capacidades técnicas y de fabricación tiene que ver en relación a la arquitectura con los lugares. Y esto es algo que es muy interesante ver cuando uno trabaja en lugares tan distintos como China o Corea, o en este caso Holanda, en este viaje en el que hay trabajo con distintas culturas y con distintas maneras de construir y de materiales. Thank you, Astrid, for the lecture. This was great. It's of course really amazing work, but all the explanation was wonderful. And I was remembering that when I was a student, some 30 years ago in the 90s, we used to read in Buenos Aires the Croquis magazines, and there was one by Ben van Berkel, which I really loved, and I remember it had the Möbius house in the cover. And that house looked, of course, I loved it, but it looked incredibly complex to me, geometrically. I couldn't even understand it. And now, when I see the photographs of that house, that really changed. It looked, I still like it a lot, but it looks pretty simple, and the Raffles City project looks incredibly complex. So I was wondering how architecture grew much more complex in these last decades. And I was wondering, do you think it takes more of an effort to design buildings now than it did some 20 or 30 years ago? Or it's just that digital technologies of design and construction, they are helping us to do with the same effort and with the same amount of people, much more complex buildings. I don't know how many people work, for example, in the Raffles City projects or in the projects that you've shown.
And maybe start with your last question. There were, I think, 112 people that are on the credit list of Raffles over the course of the years. And we worked on it in the Amsterdam studio and the Shanghai studios. And I think the reward to all of us was that there is so much to design in that project that, yeah, it has been a complex undertaking. And maybe that's the difference to 10 years, 20 years ago, that collaborations are a bit more complex, but we are also having better tools in a way. So I completely agree with you. I loved the Möbius house, like from the time I first saw it as well, and it was really inspiring. I still love it, but it's sort of, it was new then, and now we got used to it, and we want to do something new again. And we will get used to something new in 10 years again. So I think that's maybe a little bit also what drives us. It's maybe like for these experiences, also if you think when you used your first mobile phone, how complex was that compared to using your iPhone nowadays, for example? Like it's this evolution, and you can't, yeah, you can't be without it, and that's the status quo that you get used to it. But I think if you want to design future-proof and contribute to the future, you always have to try like pushing for the boundaries and push them forward in maybe nowadays on many more levels that are part of the project. But on the other hand, it's still like craftsmanship is very traditional to architecture. Technology is very new and innovation. So there is a funny relationship, and in each project you have to combine those new.
And how would you, because you have or you're part of a very large office, more than 200 people. How is that? how is it organized? You mentioned something about UNSense doing like work in parallel, but how is that people organized? And how does research happen within the organization?
Yeah, we have different modes of research. We have like we have different platforms for different topics. And for example, one of the new ones is connected to circularity and health. We have since, I think, 2 decades nearly the parametric platform that constantly evolves, and like the computational methods are evolving, and it's sort of it's not separated fully from the daily business of architecture. It's actually that members from different projects are in those teams for a certain time, and then they join projects again, and it's sort of a very dynamic system where also the ambitions of people, like where they want to grow to or what they need to learn, depending on which project they work, can be taken into account. So we have also a unit for urbanism, a separate urban unit. We do have futures, which is a sort of innovation forecasting, like really looking at what are the trends in the different, not typologies, but in the different fields of business that we are in, and what could architecture then contribute to that. We have different teams, but we also mix, like certain projects are of course running for a longer time, but I think we are trying to collaborate as much as possible internally as well, and that's also between the different entities. Like we are still doing projects in collaboration between the different entities, and maybe we talk a little bit more than we would need to, but I think that's also what is needed. You need to engage with people, you need to be connected with what you do.
Here are some questions, some student questions in the chat. I will read some, but all the professors, feel free to open the microphone and ask whatever you would like to ask. Somebody asked, do you think the structure is forms the design, or is it the other way around? Is it the structure that adapts to the environment? I will rephrase it. How do you explain or describe the relation between the structure and the space, and or maybe the context also in your projects?
I'm not exactly sure where it relates to, but I guess to the
I will rephrase it again. How is structural design integrated into the design process?
Very much, for example, the one column that I showed for the Arnhem project, like it's the space dividing element, but it's also the one column of the roof. And for example, what you like the tower in Hangzhou, the structure also follows the geometry, and by that it could be used less material and there was more stiffness. It got several structural awards for that. But I think that the question is also how you integrate the green with it, right? Or am I reading wrong in the question?
No, yeah, I think that's...
I think the idea is because I was showing inner city projects that have a high floor area ratio, so there's often not much area for public space. And I think what we are trying is to maximize green public space. And if that's not possible only on the ground floor, for example, to also create like the roof and the stepping up of the podium as part of this public space experience, so that you feel like you are in a bigger green space than you actually would if it's just about the massing. So trying to not say there's like the modernist method of, okay, there's massing and the rest is green and landscape, but trying to merge the two by bringing green and green terraces into the podium and trying to expand that area.
Right, or the courtyards in Raffles City that show that very well also.
Yeah.
Hello, hi. I wanted to ask something. How, Astrid?
Hi.
Thank you for your wonderful lecture. Taking the time, it was a beautiful gift in the middle of these strange times. And I'm wondering, you've been on the office since '98, so you've been in the office since the beginning of the office.
Oh,
The
10 years later.
And you are obviously a big part of it. And I'm wondering how you get to organize such a big office doing work that's somewhat very coherent. I wouldn't say just in style, just in questions of style, but it's very smart in everything it does, and you can see the line of thought on it. So how do you have a manual of style? How do you handle new people coming in and adapting to the way of thinking and the culture of the office? How do you handle this kind of stuff?
No, we actually don't have a manual of style. Actually, we always try to push the boundary and find something new. But I think what we have in the organization, as well as that we have that organizes our project, is a little bit of this analytic process obsession, and trying to frame it, and the freedom. So I think in the design processes with the teams, there is always some analysis. We work with engineers, and we try to actually work with the constraints and with the problems and try to solve something, but there's at the same time something free and a bit intuitive in it. And I think that's even in the office organization, because we started off as family company in a way. And I think there's this connectedness that makes it very strong. And of course, we have our processes, and we have learned throughout the 30-something years of, first it was from Berkeley and Boss, then it changed to UNStudio. And I think we are constantly learning and trying to also design our organization in a way, like, and it keeps on evolving. So I think it's never finished.
Thank you.
Here, Matthias says, thank you for the lecture. As a studio that works in many places of the world, do you find it difficult to balance international with local architecture?
Yeah, you know, the Netherlands is very, very small. So in 2 hours, you are not anymore local. And that's where, yeah, it already starts. And we started working, I think 97, 98, we started working more abroad. Like the first projects realized outside of the Netherlands were in Austria, Germany. And then we started gradually also expanding to Asia and other continents. And I think, yes, it needs a balance, and of course it's more challenging because you are always confronted with new people, new clients, new cultures, but that makes it super exciting because it gives an extra layer to the work that you do. And we see it also with our diverse team. Like we are, yeah, a bit more than 300, but we have in all offices people from everywhere in the world, and that makes it exciting too, to work with such a diverse group on diverse projects and trying to understand, yeah, where things sometimes come from and how you could interpret them in a different way. And it's this openness to all these design influences, I think, that makes sometimes the process richer.
And you were here from Argentina. We see European countries as very similar, but you were born in Austria and you decided to move to the Netherlands. And why did you decide to move to Amsterdam? And how is Amsterdam or the Netherlands different from other European countries to you?
It was actually that lecture that I mentioned in the beginning. where I thought, oh, wow, interesting. I have to follow Van Berkel a little bit more. And then I think in the end of the 90s, there was also a tendency from Austria, but also Germany, to come to the Netherlands. I think that was the period where a lot of people moved to the Netherlands, and I came, and I was super excited because it's a complete, like the practice is somewhat different. Like it's more integrated with infrastructure, with urbanism than what I was used to in Austria. And then when we were also looking to developing new digital tools and involving with the computers, I sort of took a break from Van Berkel and Bos and went for a year to New York to study with Axel at Columbia. And this was really because I had the feeling, if I want to contribute in UNStudio in the best way for the future, I have to learn all these tools myself. And I think that was a good thought, and that made me also sort of stay and be connected. So it wasn't the idea, okay, it has to be Holland or something. It was layered on many levels. It's the working method, the people, the location, the opportunities that I got, and the projects that I could work on. So it's a multifaceted story. And I think that's also what makes me thrive, and which is important. Like I think if you're a young student, you only know a little bit of what architecture could be. And I think it's a sort, the exploration and the journey starts, and it can go different ways with every project, but you have to stay true to yourself and what you believe in, and work on that, and also try to contribute something that's beneficial for others. I think that's the nice thing about being in the practice of architecture, that you also can see what effect it can have on others, and how it can, for example, influence city life or make things better connected. And that's fun and rewarding.
I want to continue. Can I?
Yes.
Do you hear? Yeah. Hello. Hi, Astrid. Thank you very much for the lecture. It was very interesting. I want to ask you, as you started with what really matters in architecture and what is important, what can we contribute with? I always wonder in this kind of offices, what's the importance of doing curved things in balance with how much complicated it is in construction? Putting those two things in relation.
That you could answer for every project differently, and we do projects that don't have a single curve for reasons as well. But if you look at product design, then the natural curves are more connected to humans, or you would more likely feel attracted to it. And that's because of touching, because of the scale. And I think if you, and a similar thing happens with natural materials, right? Like, and with nature, our brain works better, and we are more appreciative of that. So I think the word of architecture is not about either or, but it's of a smart combination of the two or different things. And I think we try to find with every project a good balance. And for example, you could say the Raffle City Towers, why do they have to be curved? Actually, it was commercial decisions that made it, I mean, the building costs are higher, but it also made it more attractive to like rent out. So it's a balance of the two things and the gain of it as well. So it's not for the sake of being curved, but striking the balance.
I imagine it would go through that channel, because it's a lot because of the importance of the image. It's a commercial and it's an attractiveness issue.
No, not that way, but I think because of saving, for example, material for the columns, because of stiffness things, the building costs would be cheaper on the main structure, but then because the elements are still rectangular and repetitive, that has some, because it's such a high amount of panels, it's again not overly expensive, but it appears to be curved.
Yeah.
So it's a sort of, like if we would insist we need curved glass, yeah, no way to do that. And we know that, like as architects. So it's this balance of creating this illusion in a way with actually quite conventional means.
Here,
Okay.
does industry work hand by hand with your studio in reaching the innovative results you want to achieve? Do you think your work also improves or pushes industry production and products to improve?
Yeah, but I think that's something that is locally very different. It depends on where the projects are and how the making of projects is. For example, like, yeah, some countries and regions are more advanced in prefabrication, and then you design differently than when it's still about manual assembly and using more labor.
And here, Vicky, one of the students, is asking, what is your opinion about the architectural programs given in universities in relation to the technological approach in architecture happening nowadays?
Well, that's a too wide question, and I think I don't have enough background to clearly answer that with an opinion, but I'm happy to explore.
Have you been teaching for the last years?
I have been teaching in the early 2000s, so already some time ago, but with then the traveling and the setting up of the office in Shanghai, I reduced that, but I've always been, yeah, close to some universities for part-time teaching, like not a regular program, but now and then a lecture or a workshop, like a high-rise symposium in the Technical University of Delft, or something that we did with UNStudio for 2 years in a row, I think twice. And like many of our architects are involved in yeah, sort of these workshops and teaching. And of course, Ben van Berkel, he was holding the Kenzo Tange chair at Harvard University. So there's lots of connection there as well.
Anybody else wants to ask something?
I can continue if nobody's there. Okay, then it's me again. I know that you're very much, as I explained, you're very much program-based projecting, isn't it? I mean, you design with the program. So when you talk about how things are going to change with time, how do you manage? Because in your scheme in the diagram with the circular houses, one inside the other one, I think it wasn't there, the program. When the program's going to change, and how do you relate to that?
No, it depends. Like, for example, for the inner layer, the interior, if the program changes, that's quite an easy thing and happens often, right? The more difficult part is the structure, and that's why the UNStudio tower is an interesting one, because we had to design the tower for residential use, or so that wouldn't be the case, which means there are different rules on fire escape and on daylighting. And the voids that are, funny enough, in this office building, they wouldn't need to be in an office building. They are there in case it becomes a residential building. And I think then the next point is, of course, the floor to ceiling heights that are normally quite different, or the ideal is very different. And I think that's where, yeah, you have to make a compromise then if you think, yeah, that has to be flexible. On the other hand, if it's, for example, a building that is owned and operated by the same client, the likelihood of changing programs is not that high, right? Like, so it depends also on this speculative aspect, how much flexibility you design for.
I have one final question, and it's maybe the obvious question, which is about the pandemic and its relation to architecture. How do you see in your work and in the countries where you're working that this pandemic will affect architecture? Like a couple of weeks ago, we were talking to Eric Bunge, who is in New York. His office is an architect, and he was telling us that he had a big co-living project that got canceled. What effects are you seeing now, and what effects do you imagine in the future for architecture?
I think we will look at the finer grain again, no? Like, we will look at the 20-minute city. We will look at buildings that have more of the social spaces or the shared spaces that can, yeah, keep us segregated when it's needed, but also create, yeah, these safe spaces. So I think the idea that it's more human-centric is a good one, because no one wants to live in distance all the time. No one wants this bad rules all the time. So we have to overcome that and maybe find a strategy how you control how many people are in a space, how many people use a building with technologies maybe, so that we don't even see it and feel it, but that we can enjoy life as humans. And I think that's where maybe integrating technology in the future, in some countries it's already happening more than in others, like to see how places are filled, will be the new future. Because it needs to take the fear that we all have from us, and it has to bring something positive to our future.
That's great. That's great. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, of course,
for your translation. I'm sorry I spoke so much.
No, that was perfect, and it's been really a great like a trip for our minds and for our eyes, the trip that we cannot do with our bodies through the world, and it's been really great to talk to you and to be more familiarized with your projects. It always happens to me that, especially with these projects, that you see a lot in media, that when you hear the explanation and you hear all the ideas behind it, they get completely transformed. They get a different meaning. So yeah. That's what I love about architectural lectures, and that's why this was great for all of us. So thank you so much, Astrid, and I look forward to meeting you personally sometime in the future. Maybe we can invite you to Buenos Aires or have a beer in Amsterdam. So
yeah, let's do that. This is a good idea.
So thank you so much.
Hopefully a beer somewhere.
Yeah. Let's do that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Ciao a todos.
Okay.